is National Donate Life Month, and the need for organ donors is strong.
In tonight's Healthbeat 4, KTIV's Claire Bradshaw sits down with the family of an organ donor and tells us how their loss has helped so many.
Check yes on your driver's license. That's the push behind Donate Life Month. More than 100,000 people are waiting for a life-saving donation, according to the organization. Every 9 minutes, someone's added to that waiting list.
Actually, the month of April, there's been more people in the first week of April that have signed up than a lot of time in history. And so it's been really good to see that. Numbers in Iowa are just a little bit higher than the national average.
Melissa Foister lost her husband, Michael, in 2020. His family describes him as a selfless, helping man who literally gave the shoes off his feet once to someone in need.
It came natural to him. He didn't really look for things to help people with, but it would surprise us.
When doctors asked Melissa and Michael's parents if they would donate his organs, they say the decision was almost immediate.
With him always helping people, we wanted to make that decision, and I discussed it with his mom and dad and with my son, and we made the decision that we wanted him to continue to help.
At the height of COVID, they weren't sure if Michael would get an honor walk, but the hospital made sure it happened. Michael ended up donating both his kidneys, his lungs, his liver. 184 grafts have been created from his bones and connective tissue across 13 states. The Foister family gets letters from the Iowa Donor Network letting them know about the transplant recipients.
Over the last 2 years, knowing that Mike is still out there helping several, actually hundreds of people with the donation of life has helped us with knowing that he's still alive through others.
While Michael's death was unexpected at 40, he has inspired Melissa and others to become organ donors, and they never want to stop hearing from the lives he's helped. In Sioux City, Claire Bradshaw, KTIV News 4.
Anyone can be an organ, eye, or tissue donor. There are no restrictions or criteria. Doctors determine what you can donate when you die. Dr. Larry Voles with Mercy One Siouxland Medical Center urges people to lay out their wishes with their loved ones sooner rather than later.
If people have had the conversation with their spouse, with their parents, with their siblings, to tell them, hey, if this were to ever happen to me, I want to be a donor, please make sure that happens. If they haven't had that conversation, then many times families are on the fence and they're going to really sort of implement their wishes, not necessarily the wishes of the donor.
And there are lots of ways to become a donor. We have information inside this story right now at KTIV.com.